by the Islamic Republic of Japan. They were shot. So I was saying we have an aircraft carrier, which is one of the most beautiful in the world. It's one of the biggest, the Abraham Lincoln. And 2 months ago, we had 100, I told this story yesterday, we had 111 missiles shot by the Islamic Republic of Japan.
The Islamic Republic of Japan. Japan is not an Islamic republic, and Japan did not fire 111 missiles at an American aircraft carrier. President Trump was apparently talking about Iran.
Do you have a question for President Putin, please? Do you have a question for President Putin? Not Zelensky. Yeah, what would you like to ask him? Because I'm going to ask him that question.
I have a question. Last year.
Then, while sitting beside Ukrainian President Zelensky, Trump appeared to call him President Putin.
I'm a big fan of President Xi. A lot of people say, oh, why? You know, I watched a couple of people critical of the fact that TikTok is so bad, it's so dangerous, it's so horrible, they're spreading all these rumors. And the numbers came out yesterday. You know who's number one on TikTok? I am. I'm number one on TikTok. And all I talk about is how bad communism is, right?
TikTok became Tic-Tac?
Everything was good. We had records and everything. We were doing great. And I said, I hate to tell you, but we're going to have to take a detour. We're going to have to go to war or go to a military operation, which my people would prefer that I use as a term because war means things that they don't like. But whether you call it war or not, it is what it is. And we're going to go down to the Islamic Republic of Iran, and we're going to have to hit them very hard. And don't forget, when Barack Hussein Obama did the JCPOC, if you look at that, Barack Hussein Obama, have you heard of him? He was a disaster.
And the JCPOA, the International Agreement Concerning Iran's Nuclear Program, became the JCPOC. A little while ago, I published an episode about President Donald Trump, presidential health, and the 25th Amendment. That episode became one of the most watched videos on this channel. And at that time, I raised a basic question. What happens when there are legitimate concerns about a president's ability to carry out the responsibilities of the office, but the people surrounding that president have little political incentive to acknowledge them? The NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey, has brought that question back. Not because one mistaken word proves that Donald Trump has dementia. It does not. And not because every aging politician who forgets a name should be removed from office. They should not. It's quite a job to be president, and honestly, it's I can imagine the mental and physical marathon that presidents have to go through every day. But that is the expectation. The concern is the accumulation of mistakes, the nature of those mistakes, and whether they should represent a noticeable change from the president's previous baseline. So let's look at what actually happened. During an appearance with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Trump discussed an alleged Iranian missile attack involving the USS Abraham Lincoln. But that is not what he said.
I was saying we have an aircraft carrier, which is one of the most beautiful in the world. It's one of the biggest, the Abraham Lincoln. And 2 months ago, we had 100, I told this story yesterday, we had 111 missiles shot by the Islamic Republic of Japan. They were shot at the aircraft carrier over a period of about 1 hour. 111 missiles going to a very expensive ship, and every one of those missiles was knocked down. But they launched a couple of drones and one rocket, one missile, and at ships, because they were in the strait, which they have every right to be. And so we hit them very hard last night, very, very hard. Probably hit them hard again tonight. I'll give them a little warning, we're going to hit them hard tonight.
The country Trump appeared to mean was Iran. Its official name is the Islamic Republic of Iran. Japan, of course, is a close American ally. This was not merely a slight mispronunciation. The president substituted the name of one country for another while describing an alleged military attack against the United States. He also claimed that 111 missiles had been fired toward the USS Abraham Lincoln. But the United States military previously disputed claims that the aircraft carrier had been struck. That does not necessarily tell us anything definitive about Trump's health. People misspeak. They reach for the wrong word. They combine two thoughts into one sentence. But when the subject is a conflict involving American forces, the accuracy of the president's words matters. If a president accidentally substitutes one hostile country for an allied country, journalists should not just treat that as an amusing internet quip or internet content. They should ask whether it was an isolated slip or part of a pattern. Shortly afterward, Trump appeared to confuse the Ukrainian president with the man who invaded his country.
Do you have a question for President Putin, please?
Пане президенте, чи можете ви
Do you have a
сказати,
question for President
Yes,
Putin?
yes.
Not Zelensky, Putin. Yeah, what would you like to ask him? Because I'm going to ask him that question.
I have a question. Last year,
Trump was sitting beside President Zelensky. Vladimir Putin is the president of Russia. This particular mistake may sound familiar. At the 2024 NATO summit, President Joe Biden introduced Zelensky as President Putin before immediately correcting himself. Trump and his allies used mistakes like that to argue that Biden was mentally unfit for office. And frankly, I have never disagreed with this. Biden's condition deserved scrutiny. By the end of his presidency, there were legitimate questions about his communication, his stamina, and cognitive health. But the standard cannot simply change because the president's political party changes. If confusing Zelensky with Putin was evidence of Biden's decline, the same mistake cannot become meaningless when Trump makes it. We excuse Trump for a lot of things, and honestly, I don't think we should be doing that. That does not mean the two presidents necessarily have the same medical condition. It means comparable behavior deserves comparable scrutiny. TikTok became tic-tac. On its own, this is probably the least consequential mistake. Most people have occasionally said a similar sounding word by accident. Tick-tock, tic-tac. Trump also caught and corrected the behavior, but it occurred in the same stretch of public appearances as the Iran-Japan confusion and the Zelensky-Putin confusion. That is why the cluster matters more than the individual mistake. A clinician evaluating cognitive health would not ordinarily reach a conclusion from one misplaced word. They would look for patterns. Is the person struggling with word retrieval? Are substitutions becoming more frequent? Does the person recognize and correct mistakes? Are the errors affecting daily functioning or decision making? And most importantly, do the changes represent a departure from how that individual previously communicated? Now, Trump has always been an off-the-cuff stream of consciousness speaker. But I think there is a pattern with confusing ideas, confusing country names, confusing conflicts. I think there is a pattern there that shows some decline. But We don't have enough medical information to answer those questions for Donald Trump, mostly because they are not being transparent with what's going on with him. But the public appearances give us a legitimate reason to ask questions.
And don't forget, when Barack Hussein Obama did the JCPOA.
A stands for the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It was during the 2015 International Nuclear Agreement with Iran, from which Trump withdrew the United States during his first term. This is an agreement that Trump has discussed for years. Again, changing one letter is not proof of a neurological illness. But the larger concern is that these mistakes involved subjects at the center of the summit: Iran, Ukraine, Russia, military defense, and nuclear policy. These were not obscure trivia questions. They were matters the president was there to discuss. What do these mistakes actually prove? The honest answer is not very much by themselves. You cannot watch several video clips and responsibly diagnose someone with frontotemporal dementia, Alzheimer's disease, or any other neurological condition. Frontotemporal dementia can involve changes in behavior, judgment, language, and communication. But difficulties with words can also be associated with ordinary aging, exhaustion, hearing problems, stress, medications, sleep problems, and many other medical conditions. Trump is 80 years old. A meaningful assessment would require a medical history, interviews, cognitive testing, neurological examination, and potentially laboratory tests and brain imaging. And we know that Trump is getting these kinds of treatments. He mentions his IQ tests, which are cognitive tests, and mentions getting CAT scans and MRIs. But we, as the public, don't have that information. And the American Psychiatric Association's Goldwater Rule cautions psychiatrists against giving professional opinions about public figures they have not personally examined. And that caution exists for a good reason. A political opinion is not a medical diagnosis. But refusing to diagnose Trump from afar does not require us to ignore what we can plainly observe. We can document that the mistakes happened. We can compare them with his earlier public communication. We can ask whether they are becoming more frequent. I think they are. And we can demand more meaningful medical transparency from the White House. And we are not getting that. Trump and the White House continue to describe him as being in excellent health, but statements from a presidential physician are only as useful as the information they contain. The American public should not have to choose between two political extremes. One side insisting that every verbal mistake proves dementia, and the other insisting that no amount of observable difficulty is worthy of examination. There is a reasonable position between those two. At 80 years old, the president should receive regular, independent, and transparent cognitive evaluations. He does seem to be receiving those, but there is no transparency, and is it independent if it's the White House physician? The public does not need access to every private medical detail, but Americans should know whether the person controlling the military, nuclear authority, and foreign policy of the United States is able to understand information, communicate decisions, and consistently perform the duties of the presidency. That should apply to President Donald Trump And it should have applied to President Joe Biden. And it should apply to every future president, regardless of the party. What about the 25th Amendment? The 25th Amendment is frequently misunderstood. And like I mentioned before, I do have an episode about the 25th Amendment published previously on my YouTube channel. The 25th Amendment is not a mechanism for removing a president because he makes embarrassing statements. It is not a substitute for an election, and it is not designed to resolve political disagreement. In fact, it is locked down tight on that. Section 4 allows the vice president and a majority of the principal officers of the executive departments to declare that a president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office. That is an extremely high threshold. Nothing we saw at NATO by itself establishes that the threshold has been reached. But you can also look at previous things and a previous decline and possibly make that case. But the 25th Amendment contains a practical weakness. The people expected to initiate the process are members of the president's own administration, who have all been very carefully selected for their loyalty. Their authority, careers, and political futures may depend on that president. So the question for my original episode remains: who evaluates the president when the people closest to him have every incentive to say that nothing is wrong? There is another reason these NATO moments deserve attention. Donald Trump made Joe Biden's age and cognitive fitness a central political issue. He mocked Biden's verbal mistakes. He questioned whether Biden understood where he was. His supporters circulated compilations of Biden stumbling over names, losing his train of thought, or appearing confused. Some of those clips were selectively edited or stripped of context. Others reflected real and legitimate concerns. But Trump cannot create a political standard and then be exempted from it. If Americans were entitled to question Biden's mental fitness, and they are entitled to question Trump's. The answer cannot be, it mattered when the other man did it, but it is merely a joke when our man does it. The Islamic Republic of Japan. Zelensky becoming Putin. TikTok becoming Tic-Tac. The JCPOA becoming the JCPOC. None of these moments prove that Donald Trump has dementia, but together they do raise reasonable questions about his language, concentration, and command of the subjects he was discussing. Perhaps these were ordinary verbal mistakes amplified by the pressure and exhaustion of an international summit. I can only imagine. Perhaps they were examples of the loose, improvisational speaking style that Trump has used for decades. Or perhaps they are part of a meaningful change that deserves closer medical attention. We cannot determine which explanation is correct from these clips alone. But the president is not an ordinary private citizen. His words can move and have moved markets. They can alter alliances. They can increase or reduce the risk of war. And when a president repeatedly confuses the countries and leaders involved in those decisions, asking questions about his fitness is not partisan. It is part of holding power accountable. The White House does not owe the public speculation. It owes the public credible information, independent testing, meaningful disclosure, and the same standard of transparency that Americans were told to demand from the president who came before him. Because presidential health is not only a private matter when it affects the ability to perform the most powerful job in the world. I am Dorie Smith, an independent journalist. This is the journalism of everything. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe. I am a one-woman show. I do all of the episode creation, script writing, producing, directing, whatever, editing, all by myself. I'm also a busy wife and mom, just have a very busy life outside of journalism. So if you enjoyed this, please subscribe. Also, I do have merchandise available. Please check it out, including a 25th Amendment. Please check it out on my channel, on my YouTube channel, and on my website. Thanks for listening.